as of right now, we are recording this meeting. So once again, thanks everybody for being here. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Jake, if you want to go to the next slide. So again, we're here to talk about Puget Sound recreational fisheries as part of the North of Falcon process. Again, my name is Mark Baltzell. I'm the statewide salmon and steelhead manager. With me today is Derek Dapp from our FRAM modeling team. Chad Herring, he's an anadromous resource policy analyst for the department. Jake Rice is our Puget Sound salmon manager, and Dr. Kirsten Simonson is our Puget Sound rec biologist. So we're going to I'm going to turn it over here to Jake and Kirsten to run through the forecasts for Puget Sound. Just a quick recap for those of you who weren't with us for the forecast meeting a couple weeks ago. We're going to roll into Chinook and Cohe management objectives for 2021. Look at some of the preliminary modeling that come out of the Pacific Fishery Management Council meetings and what that may mean for fishery seasons this year. And then, like I said, the primary reason we're here today is to hear your thoughts about recreational seasons, what your preferences and priorities are. So with that, I'll maybe turn it over to Jake and Kirsten. I don't know if you guys have worked out who's doing what slides, but maybe have you guys run through the forecasts.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I hope everybody can hear me. Good morning and welcome, everybody. So just to recap from our forecast meeting a couple weeks ago, Puget Sound Chinook natural stocks are down 20%, hatchery stocks down 2% from our recent 10-year averages. Puget Sound Coho natural stocks down 15%, hatchery stocks up 35% from our 10-year average. Puget Sound Pink overall forecast down 31% from our 10-year average. Puget Sound Chum natural stocks down 61%, hatchery stocks down 64% from our 10-year averages. A lot of this will be repeat from our forecast meeting for those that were there. So Puget Sound natural Chinook, overall kind of a mixed bag with a few stocks up, some stocks down. Overall down about 7% compared to last year. Our hatchery not quite as favorable returns with about 11% overall reduced forecast from last year. The Coho, I think there's a little bit better opportunities here. Overall, a little bit higher. There are a couple, Dungeness and Elwha are predicted a lot lower with our natural. However, I think overall there's a more positive trend. With our hatchery, this one's really a mixed bag this year, with some up, some down, some positive, but overall about an 8% increase from last year. Puget Sound Pink forecast, 2021, we're looking at just over 2.9 million on the forecasted. Just as a comparison, the 2019 forecast was just over 600,000 with a total return of about 3 million. And then with the pink forecast, this is just a little bit bigger, more in-depth breakdown of the water bodies that we're going to see on the pinks this year, or at least we're forecasting. So this we'll get into a little bit deeper later, and I'm sure there'll be quite a number of questions with opportunities this year. Chum, Puget Sound, this one's a little tough. This one, our forecasts are quite a bit lower. Total sound, just over 500,000 fish. I think as we go through this presentation, we'll dig in a little deeper on where we have some constraints and where we think fishing will be a challenge this year. With that, I will turn it over to Derek, if Derek's on here, and can go over our management objectives a little better for you.
Thanks, Jake. Yep, I'm on the line, and this slide is kind of very similar to ones that we saw earlier in the presentation. So I'll be pretty brief with this slide in particular here. At some point during this breakout, we are going to go a little bit more in depth into the modeling and kind of what we're preliminarily seeing. But kind of just once again to point out some of those Chinook management objectives that we're going to be paying attention to in Puget Sound. I'd highlight, first of all, the two Skagit stocks. Those are stocks that are both below their low abundance threshold and at lower objectives than we've seen kind of in recent years. Particularly the Skagit Summer Falls, the Skagit Springs last year were below their low abundance threshold. So that is the same objective as last year, but the Summer Falls, this is that's kind of a new one, being at 17% in the SUS. Mid-Hood Canal has been one of those stocks that has been a major constrainer to sport fisheries in recent years. This year, you'll notice that it's labeled as a to be determined, as we're working with our co-managers to discuss that management objective there. Stillaguamish will be a big focus for this year, and the management objectives that we have for this year are the same as the last. You can see a 22% total exploitation rate objective, an 8% unmarked SUS exploitation rate objective, and a 12% marked SUS exploitation rate objective. Next slide. Oh, I think we skipped over the Cohe one there. Oh, no, my bad. Sorry, next slide. There we go. Okay, so with this one, once again, we have been over it in the main meeting, but just to highlight kind of two things from this slide. One change from last year is seeing a change on that Stillaguamish total exploitation rate ceiling. It's jumped up an abundance tier, and so now we're looking at a 50% total ER objective, whereas last year it was 35%. And the big one that we're going to be looking at for Cohe this year, as mentioned, is Snohomish being below that 55,000 escapement goal.
Put your earplug. Okay, Adam in.
Lance, I just wanted to give you a heads up that you're unmuted. All right, so for the current Cohe modeling, you can see once again this is one that we kind of went over in the previous presentation in the main session. But once again, highlighting that Snohomish escapement being a goal of 55,000 and seeing the range of ocean options there producing escapements anywhere between 47,000 in the high and 48,000 in the low. So if we could just go back, I think I messed you up a little bit here, Jake. I think just to go over the Chinook objectives and where we're at there. Thank you. Next one. There you go. So just to highlight kind of where we're at preliminarily, is on Skagit, you can see that 17% SUS ER objective, and right now the preliminary modeling is coming out at 29.2%. The Skagit Springs, we are below that 10.3% objective in the preliminary modeling, but for both Skagit Summer Falls and Skagit Springs, I would note that there's the 2020 fisheries in there right now, so we'll be paying attention to those and taking a look and seeing how those changes when we add in the 2021 fisheries. As far as Nisqually goes, that's another one that right now it's coming out a little bit over its objective in the preliminary runs at 52.3%. And because the Nisqually abundance is down, that's another one we'll be looking at in future runs. For Stillaguamish, what I would point out there is the right now we're at 8.5% on the unmarked SUS and 12.1% on the marked SUS. I see a hand raise. I see a hand raise from Carl.
Yeah, hey Derek. Just a question on the Stillaguamish exploitation there. Is that pre-terminal or does that include terminal?
Thanks, Carl. So that includes both terminal and pre-terminal on all metrics. And we will do once again, we will do a little bit of a deeper dive into Stillaguamish using a modeling tool that we've worked up, and we'll kind of present and go through. However, right now, I would just give a reminder as to what we're looking at here. What we're looking at here in these preliminary model runs that we're going over is the updated ocean options and updated northern fisheries where we have them. However, those the fisheries that are in there currently still represent those that were modeled in 2020.
So which ocean option are you using?
Good question. I'm using the high ocean option in this one.
So Derek, how about, I think we've got one or two more slides in the presentation, and maybe let me run through those, and then let's turn it back over to you to run through some of the preliminary looks that we've had at what the modeling looks like for this year, if that works for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark.
As we talked about in the last meeting, obviously, Chinook management objectives are always a key to make sure that we have our targets for this year. I think the only one that we're not keyed in on for this year is that Mid-Hood Canal. Folks will remember last year during the North of Falcon process, we were actually in a meet and confer process under the US v. Washington court case through North of Falcon because we had a disagreement on that management objective. We've continued those conversations through the year up to and including very recently. We still do not have an agreement on management objectives for this year, but we do have guidance from NOAA Fisheries that they put out as part of their they put out a letter to the Pacific Fisheries Management Council. That's a guidance document primarily for ocean fisheries, but it also helps us as co-managers and inside managers of Puget Sound know what those management objectives and things that NOAA Fisheries is going to key in on whenever they're evaluating the fisheries package for approval under ESA. So as Derek talked about the Cohe management objectives, again, I think the one we're really keying in on there, that as we've said many times, is the Snohomish. The challenge we have there is we're trying to minimize our impacts on the natural stock, but there's quite a few pinks that are due to come back to the Snohomish system that we want to be able to access both in the marine area and in the freshwater area. So we'll be looking at opportunities to craft fisheries to access that. We talked about the depressed runs of chum this year. The department has already taken action that we're going to close recreational chum fisheries in Mid and South Sound pre-season this year. So they will be closed unless we get different information in season this year that that gives us confidence that we won't have too big of an impact if we open up those fisheries. So just wanted to put that out there. Obviously, we've heard from constituents since last year that when we had to reduce or we chose to reduce a number of winter fishing seasons to meet our management objectives last year. We know that there's those winter blackmouth fisheries are very popular amongst a lot of our constituents. Also this year, we had a less than satisfying opportunity in Area 10 when we were only open for 18 days. We had a high number of sublegal encounters in that fishery. One of the things that the department entered into right as that fishery was going on, or right at the end, was we started testing different gear, and we've entered into a gear study to test the effects of using larger size lures and plugs to try to see if we can minimize our sublegal encounters. So we'll be continuing that through the month of March. We're going to be evaluating a lot of that data with our co-managers and seeing if we can continue that if we are able to agree on any winter fishing opportunity next year. Like I said, the pink and chum opportunities, the chum opportunities will be limited. We've looked at some analysis for pinks. I think at this time, the department is going to just offer pinks as part of the daily limit and not offer any bonus limits in marine area fisheries. We will be targeting elevated pink daily limits on those systems that have larger returns. One of the issues that we have, especially in the kind of Everett area 8 area, is Stillaguamish pink salmon are due to come in below the escapement level. So again, it's trying to harvest those more abundant Snohomish and Skagit pinks and trying to minimize impacts on Stilly pinks. So Jake, do you want to move to the next slide? There we go. So just again, we talked about these at the last meeting, but just so folks are aware, the next big recreational dates are the 23rd next week on Tuesday, the 25th on Thursday. Essentially, those will be the same presentation. So we're just trying to offer multiple opportunities. If you can't make one, maybe you can make the other. And then again, our North of Falcon #2 meeting on the 31st. Followed by our PFMC meetings in April. We will be doing daily meetings as part of the PFMC meetings in April. please make sure you're checking the website for that information as we finalize that. We'll make sure to have links on the website. And obviously, we like to have all these meetings and all the forecasts and everything up on our website, wdfw.wa.gov/NOF for North of Falcon. So with that, what I might do is just pause to see if there's any questions or comments. And then after that, I think we're going to turn it over to Derek to do a little bit deeper dive into some of the modeling and what we're seeing for potential fishery seasons this year.
Hello, you open for questions?
You're unmuted, Mike.
Okay. So I don't fish for chum, and I was just curious how many sports fishermen actually go after chum that we would have such an impact, but we would let the tribes and commercials fish for chum.
Well, thanks for Mike. Obviously, we don't have a lot of chum that are caught in recreational fisheries. I think on average, it's anywhere between 11 and 15,000 a year. But that's kind of, you mentioned why would we let tribes and the state. At this point, I don't believe there's any pre-terminal fishing planned for either the tribes or the state. There may be some in-river terminal tribal fisheries that may be put into effect depending on what those runs look like. But I think it's a pretty collective concern for all the co-managers this year. So that's why we're preemptively closing those, because we're closing the other fisheries out in front as well.
Sure, if you're going to close it though, it seems like you would close it even if it goes into, even if they go into the river. Otherwise, it just feels like someone's gaming the system. Again, I don't fish for chum, so it's not a big deal for me. I'm just wondering. So, okay, thanks. You have time for another question?
Go ahead, Mike.
So this is probably a bigger question than just Puget Sound, but I think it's been discussed over a couple of years why we don't, both the co-managers and ourselves, go through the same bureaucracy of NOAA to get our permits to fish, and that why the state can't independently do that, and that we can basically be held hostage to demands from the co-managers. And this is not to pick on the co-managers. I'm just trying to say, why don't we have that so that the field's a little bit more level?
Well, I think one thing that would get us to level is having a long-term harvest management plan in place. The whole reason that we have to come to an agreement and we have to go through a section 7 consultation with the Bureau of Indian Affairs is because we don't have a long-term agreed to management plan in place that's been kind of given its stamp of approval through NOAA. We've been working with NOAA Fisheries and our co-managers, I want to say since 2014 on a long-term management plan. There's been a number of improvements that we've made over time to both the management tool that we use in the FRAM model, as well as conversations over management objectives with the co-managers. You know, we went down this road in 2016, and in 2016, we were told that the state didn't have a federal nexus. Now, we have never challenged that. We've essentially tried to work under the framework that we have right now to try to get to a long-term agreement. Folks may remember that back in, I believe it was 2017, the co-managers did submit a plan to NOAA and it was deemed insufficient. So what that meant is we had to go back to the drawing board on a number of different systems work on refining those objectives so NOAA would deem them sufficient. Again, during that time, we've had a number of changes to the FRAM model too that have kind of, I don't want to say it's gotten in the way, but it's led to further conversations with co-managers. I think the latest update is we've agreed that this management model we're using for this year's agreement will be different next year. The modeling team did an update to the model over this past off season, and we're hoping to implement that next year for fisheries package and have a long-term agreement submitted to NOAA by late this fall. So that's where we're at now. I know sometimes it seems unfair, but what it really comes down to is we have continued conservation concerns with a lot of these stocks. Yes, we have a lot of hatchery fish that seem to be doing okay, but when it comes down to it, our natural stocks are not doing well. And, you know, we're 20 years into ESA now, and these stocks keep getting worse. So I think we're trying to do everything we can as co-managers to try to ensure that we're putting fisheries in place that aren't jeopardizing that into the future. A lot of that, you know, comes through very difficult conversations about what that looks like. And we always try to improve that year to year, but maybe I'll stop blabbering there and move on to the next question. Or if any other staff wants to add to anything I said, please do.
I'd like to follow up afterwards.
Go ahead with your follow-up, Mike.
Okay, so one of the, and this is being the naive, so the Mid-Hood Canal seems to be driving some of the decisions. And so I've wondered, do we take DNA samples of the returning fish to show that they are actually, they have some sort of genetic mutation that makes them superior? And do we have a way to classify that to say that this fish in this river is superior to any hatchery fish that we have, and we need to do everything we can to keep this run alive? And is that run basically dead? So how do we know that these aren't nth generation hatchery fish? There's a variety of questions there.
So I hate to put him on the spot, but I see him on the line, and he's probably a better person to answer this question than I am because he's the biologist for the area. So Mark Downen, if you're available or in a spot where you can help me out here, I would appreciate it. Looks like maybe Mark's not available. What I would say to that is that way back when the technical review team was evaluating what stocks to put forth, you know, I think there was some maybe differences of opinion when it came to whether or not the Mid-Hood Canal conglomeration was a stock. So for a long time, we did a supplementation program there with Long Live the Kings. Essentially, that supplementation program ended, I want to say 6 years ago. And we're now seeing that the kind of the remnants of that failed supplementation program. So in the recent past couple of years, the co-managers have contracted out and done some habitat assessments for that. We've been in discussions with NOAA Fisheries on kind of next steps. So I think as co-managers, we're figuring that out, what the next steps are for that Mid-Hood Canal stock. I think there are a number of options at the table that we're exploring, and I don't think we've centered on any one of those yet. But essentially that's where we are right now, is as co-managers alongside NOAA Fisheries, is we're trying to figure out what to do with that, whether it's a different supplementation program or exactly what that looks like. So hope that answered your question, Mike. I see Norm has his hand up. Go ahead, Norm.
Couple of questions. I saw the Lake Washington Coho number forecast. Didn't look all that great. Will we have to be concerned with that in terms of our coho fishery, our later coho fishery? Thompson River, I saw we looked like we have a challenge maybe at Thompson River. Is that going to affect our straight fishery, our area 5 and 6 fishery for coho? Mid-Hood Canal, I hear you talking about it, Mark. I'm thinking that I saw a reply from NOAA that was less than encouraging in terms of removing those fish from that significant run designation for that particular ESU. And lastly, and most like perhaps more importantly, the in-river fishery on the Skokomish River. Have we heard anything from the Department of the Interior concerning the state's position on who owns that river? Because there's lots of folks that really would like to go fishing there again. And of course, hearing about the chum is going to be quite disappointing to a whole bunch of fly rod enthusiasts that I know that specifically target those fish for catch and release. Thank you.
So that was a lot of questions, Norm, and I'm not sure that I jotted them all down in front of me, so I'll try to tick through them as I remembered them. I don't think at this point, I haven't seen any modeling that makes me concerned that Lake Washington Coho are going to have an effect on our pre-terminal fisheries. In the recent past, we've had, us and the tribes have had a kind of a shortened lake fishery where the tribes have done some netting in the north end of the lake, and we've also had a sport fishery there. Again, in the preliminary discussions we've had with Muckleshoot tribe and Suquamish, that hasn't come up as an issue. And I'm not saying that it won't, but I would say at this point, the Snohomish run is more of a concern. Maybe I'll tick off to the Skokomish issue, because this might be a good time to address that. I know this has been an ongoing issue, obviously, since 2016. So a couple different questions you had there, Norm. No, we have not heard anything from the Department of Interior. Maybe just to do a quick recap of folks. The Skokomish tribe had a Department of Interior solicitor's opinion from 2016 that basically said that the Skokomish tribe had full with ownership of the Skokomish River along a certain section of the river. We disputed that claim. The department hired its own archaeologists. They found a piece of information that essentially refuted that claim. We submitted our evidence to the Department of Interior and asked them to reconsider their opinion. And essentially that's where we are now. So that's one path. The other path is the director and the Skokomish Tribal Council and representatives from the Skokomish tribe have been meeting on a number of different occasions over the last couple of years to try to see what we could do to come to an agreement to get fisheries back on the river, absent solicitor's opinion, kind of apart from that. So I don't want to overspeak or misspeak, but I think where we ended up at least in December or early January timeframe, is that we're interested in going into mediation together to try to resolve this issue. I think the last I heard is that the attorneys were trying to work out what that mediation would look like, deciding on a mediator and a framework for entering into that discussion. So I'm hopeful that we have a path forward. I'm not necessarily hopeful that we have a path forward for this year, but the fact that they're interested in going into mediation over this, separate and apart from what's happening at the Department of Interior, I think is encouraging. So did I miss a question there, Norm?
Yeah, but I want to continue this conversation just very quickly. The Skokomish wrote a letter threatening our North of Falcon process. Are they carrying through with that?
Not yet.
Okay,
We've had a number of discussions with both the tribe and Mid-Hood Canal tribes about fisheries this year.
Thompson River, is it going to affect our fisheries in the straits?
So I don't believe so. I think the numbers, I'm not sure what numbers you were seeing on Thompson, Norm, and we can kind of trade emails back and forth on that later. I was less concerned about Thompson because the ocean fisheries are likely pretty constrained for coho fisheries. Now, that's not to say that we aren't going to have changes this year. We got some information this year from our 2019 fisheries when we did a run reconstruction and looked at those management objectives under the Pacific Salmon Treaty that we were over on our Thompson exploitation rate in 2019 pretty significantly. And the two main drivers for that were the treaty troll fishery and our sport fisheries. So it's something we're going to have to pay attention to for this year. We do want to make sure that we're not exceeding our exploitation on that stock. So hopefully that helps.
And the Mid-Hood Canal, I'm not understanding. I thought we had the problem that when we used the new FRAM model, that our exploitation rate went up a little bit. But yet we're not using the new FRAM model for this year's fishery. So I'm confused on that.
Well, essentially, Norm, last year, we never really did finalize an agreement on what an exploitation rate should be for that stock. Essentially, how we ended it last year was we had to make such significant reductions in order to meet our Stillaguamish management objectives that by the time we did that, the exploitation rate on Mid-Hood Canal was 0.2% above the 12 that the tribe was advocating for. And they felt like that was acceptable for last year. So really what it boils down to is, yes, we're still using the old model, but the tribe's assertion is still that the management objective is 12%. And our assertion is that the objective should be 12.4 as translated to the current model that we're using under FRAM. So we're still kind of in that stalemate, but I think the encouraging part there is, you know, we're still talking about fisheries. We're considering each other's positions and we'll move forward and through the process again and see whether or not the Mid-Hood Canal is more limiting or Stillaguamish is more limiting as we go through the preseason. We'll be keeping an eye on both.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Norm. Brett Rawson, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can, go ahead.
So I might be a little ahead of the game here. Are we looking at Blackmouth and Area 7 being closed in 22?
So this is probably a great segue, Brett, for me to get Derek back on the line and walk through some of the modeling that we've done coming out of the Pacific Fishery Management Council. Obviously, for the folks who have kind of familiar with this, Derek's a whiz when it comes to the modeling and trying to think of different scenarios and what that might look like in terms of fisheries for this year. So
You want me to hold my questions?
I was just going to say, hold that question, Brett. Let's let Derek
Right.
give us some of his thoughts, and then we'll I'm sure that'll raise many more questions. So. And Derek, I don't know if you want Jake to stop sharing and if you want to share.
Yeah, that would be great. I think I'm going to take the screen from you, Jake, here.
Should be all yours, Derek. Thank you.
All right, can folks see that up on the screen now? And also, I guess I'd also double check and make sure that there isn't a box that people can see of the participants in the meeting, right?
Nope, you're good, Derek.
Okay, perfect. So some of you might be familiar with this sport fishery modeling tool from previous years' North of Falcon meetings. We've presented these in the past as a way of getting feedback on fishery shaping and priorities of the recreational community. In this tool, we can specify certain fisheries actions and take a look at how those actions affect the stock in relation to our management goals. We can signify taking an action by basically placing an X inside one of these areas in the B column, right here. So right here, what that's essentially doing is that's adding the action of putting October fishing in winter area 11. And you can see that when you're putting X's in these cells in the B column, it corresponds over to the action that's directly to the left. So there's where that's opening area 11 October. So the two primary metrics that we're monitoring are in columns I and J. You can see that this tool is very focused on Stillaguamish, which is what we think might be our most constraining stock to sport fisheries for Chinook and Puget Sound. And what you can see is right here in this row 5 and in this column I, you can basically see what our starting high ocean option run for Chinook that we came out with. You can see with the total modeled Puget Sound sport fishery catches. And then just to the right of that, what you can see is our total impacts on the total non-treaty impacts on Stillaguamish fish. And I'll go more into that in just a moment. But then basically what we can do in this tool is we can signify taking an action. So let me take out this X. And you can see post action, after you've implemented that suite of actions, you can see how that changes the total sport catch as well as the total non-treaty mortalities on Stillaguamish fish. So for example, once again, using this cell for area 11, you can see that the total sport catch from this is 92 fish. Right here in this column I that I'm highlighting, and then you can see that the total Stillaguamish mortalities that would be resulting from opening that fishery is 0.75 fish, so less than 1 fish. You can see if you put an X here, you can see that hopefully our blue box up here, our post action, you can see that it's increasing the total Puget Sound sport catch by 92 fish, and then the total Stilly impacts by 0.57 fish. And then, so now getting back to the Stillaguamish impacts, you might be asking what our goal is there. And in recent years, we've tried to split those mortalities at about a 50-50 share with the tribes. I preliminarily calculate that there will be about 124 Stillaguamish mortalities available for harvest to meet our management objectives. And so therefore, if 124 is the total approximately, then we're looking to produce a fishing package that puts us at about half of that. Therefore, about 62 Stillaguamish total mortalities is our target here. And so maybe what I'll do is I'll walk through some of the actions in a second. But I wanted to maybe first cover 2 additional metrics that I've been looking at and that I've been thinking about, which are over here in these columns N and these columns O. And these represent, first of all, the column N represents the catch of fish per, so that the sport catch per Stillaguamish mortality. And then the column O represents the months of fishing per Stillaguamish mortality. So orange or red values in column N represent actions that are less efficient for maximizing catch per Stillaguamish impact. And in column O, we're seeing, if we see orange or red, we're looking at month areas that are very costly on Stillaguamish impacts. So what that means is if you have a green column N and a green column O, it's saying that it's an action that maximizes both our catch and our time on the water relative to the amount of Stillaguamish impacts that it costs. So there, you might also note that there's some zeros over here. I'll go over what those mean shortly. But I just maybe want to pause there, and because there's a lot of numbers and a lot of metrics up on the screen. I want to see, I just want to pause and see if there are any questions before I start diving into things and looking at potential actions. I see Pat Patillo has raised his hand.
Derek, can you hear me?
I hear you, Pat.
Okay, thank you. I just I wanted to make sure that we understood completely the total numbers of Chinook impacts that you were for Stillaguamish that you were talking about there. That so I'll just ask a couple of questions and then maybe you can comment. So the 62 is related to, there's about 124 or 5 total hatchery and wild fish. And my understanding is that that's was calculated based on applying the 8% limit for wild and the 12% limit that's been agreed to between the co-managers for hatchery fish. And then those two then components add up to 124. So that's one of the first clarifications. And then the other is not a question, it's really a comment. I think what people often think is that the wild fish are the most constraining, but I think it's worth looking at or considering a different opinion. That is that it's the hatchery fish that are most constraining. Now, if all we had to work with in our fisheries is non-selective fishing, we couldn't use selective fishing, then indeed it would be the wild fish that are most constraining. But with selective fishing being used, and it's really only used by the non-tribal sport fisheries, it is actually the stilly hatchery fish that are most constraining. Maybe you could comment on that, but that's how I'm seeing it, and sort of a clarification. Thanks, Derek. Any comments that you have there, or tell me I'm wrong or whatever, go ahead. Thanks.
No, I think that those are really great questions, Pat. And I guess maybe I'll tackle the first one, the 124 fish. You are correct in how that was calculated. We looked at our initial model runs coming out, and we saw that to reach an 8% objective, which is the more constraining of the two metrics, the 8% and the 12%. The 8% is more constraining this year. It looks like it will be. To reach that 8% objective, it looks like it'll leave us about 124 stillyfish. I say about, there's a little bit of wiggle room, and you also have to remember that there are kind of other factors that could contribute to that number changing very slightly up or down. Things like new Canadian fisheries coming in, which we know is going to happen in a few weeks for that West Coast Vancouver Island troll and sport fishery, as well as Northern BC sport and troll fishery. And then the other thing that could affect things, of course, is we're looking at a high ocean option here. There could be some fluctuation either way if we see some changes to what's going on in ocean fisheries. So starting at 124 is a rough and approximate target, and I'm sure as we go through modeling exercises in the future, we'll be kind of reevaluating and ensuring that 124 is still the target. As far as your second comment, if I could jump to that one for just a moment, your second comment on what's more constraining, that's kind of a little bit of a loaded question because it depends on a lot of things going on in the modeling. Everything from age compositions of the hatchery to the wild. We tend to have higher exploitation on those age 2 and 3 fish, as well as kind of the makeup and the overall composition of how many hatchery versus wild fish there are. So, for example, we tend to have a lesser impact on the unmarked relative to the marked, just due to the nature of having marked selective fisheries. And if we're looking at the total number of mortalities and kind of a 50-50 allocation as we're planning our fisheries, that means that if there's a greater skew toward unmarked or wild fish, then that means that a larger portion of that total is comprised of the piece in which we're having a smaller exploitation rate. Conversely, if there's a very large run of marked or hatchery fish returning, and our marked exploitation rate is over that 6%, or above half of that 12% objective, i.e. 6%, then we have then that means that we get a kind of a larger allocation of the total aggregate. So I hope that wasn't too complex, and I hope that made sense. And maybe I'll just pause there and see if that helped to answer your questions, Pat, or see if that perhaps would need raise even more questions. I noticed that there's a few other hands up, so we'll get to you guys in just a second.
Go ahead, Derek. That's good enough. It's I can follow up with some more detailed questions. Thank you very much.
No worries. And I think that Norm had his hand raised next.
I'm trying to unmute. Can you hear me?
I hear you, Norm.
Could you explain the scalars for area 7 and area 9, please?
I promise I will, Norm. But I'm gonna if I could maybe let me hold off on until I get to talking about some of those actions, and then I'll kind of explain what those mean then, if that's all right.
Thank you.
And then I see Carl's hand raised.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
I hear you, Carl.
Yeah, Derek. So my question is similar to Norm, so I'll just make a quick comment about that. I see the line 14 reduced to amount modeled last year. So it looks like the 7,059 perhaps is based on this year's abundance, which is different. So it's giving a bigger number. But my comment would be, I would like, and maybe there's lines down further that I can't see on this screen, but I would like to see a tool that showed a further reduction in summer quota. And I see that it does exist there in order to be useful in finding a way to conduct a winter fishery that may require us to reduce our summer quota. And so it looks like you have those things in place. Thank you.
No worries, Carl. And I promise I'll go over each of those points as I'm going through. And then I see Brett's hand raised as well.
Yeah, Derek. So I asked this question in email. Maybe you can help flesh it out for me. So right now, unless we want to give up some salmon quota, we were looking at a closure of winter blackmouth in Area 7. Is that correct?
What I've started out modeling is, yes, I've started out modeling what we had last season. And then as we get into it, we'll see the potential actions that I've added as things that we could look at, either kind of modifying what we've got there, either by adding in months or potentially by reducing months in some other areas, and taking a look at what those costs and impacts are. I do have some options modeled here for Area 7 winter that I'll get to in just a minute.
Okay. So with the Stillaguamish CNS fishery, it's my understanding that the tribes have come out with 45 fish as their opener. Is that correct?
That is that is correct. That is their starting input. However, as I'm looking at and thinking about kind of the impacts and where and our targets, I intentionally, rather than looking at the unmarked SUS, I wanted to focus on just what we had, given what recent agreements have been, and given that that it looks like there will be collectively about 124 fish to harvest. So what you're probably thinking, Brett, and you'd be correct, is that increasing that CNS will bring up the unmarked SUS rate, as well as kind of some other changes in the model, such as increase to winter treaty troll. However, there's kind of a way that we've been managing and coming up with an allocation for this stock in the past, and I focused more on getting to where we should be with that, rather than looking at what's going on in the treaty options too much.
Is it so we've modeled right now for 45 CNS fish? Is that correct?
Not yet. So we don't have any 2021 Puget Sound inputs in the model. However, I would expect that model run would be coming very soon. Part of what we're doing today is trying to shape that sport package so that we could get that first 2021 model run together.
Okay,
so it'll be coming soon.
So then it seems like my question is premature. I'll put it out there anyways for consideration. The Stille tribe 3 years ago was at 15 fish for the CNS. Last year, they were at 30 fish for CNS, is what they finally agreed to. And this year they're at 45. It appears to me that if we at least ask them to hold at 30, that would allow us to gain a blackmouth fishery back without having to give up quota in the summer. Would that be a correct assumption?
So it's a little bit of a loaded question. I don't believe it's a correct assumption. But there's a lot of things that are dependent on that could shift it to being a correct assumption, and that's a little bit cryptic. Let me just say what I mean by that. So as far as the tribal fisheries go, the CNS isn't the only one that's impacting things, and there's also treaty troll. There's the Tulalip Bay fishery. There's kind of other fisheries in there that are influencing that Stillaguamish rate as well. So I guess that's what I'll say for that. But once again, I would really focus on what we're looking at today, and kind of how we managed in the past is to be at 50-50 on that allocation piece, in addition to meeting our 8% and 12% objective. So it is possible we could, as we get into the modeling, we can explore that, but it would likely put us, if we began reopening lots of blackmouth areas, it would likely put us over that 50-50 allocation mark.
If we, and again, this may not be something you've approached yet, size limit changes. We talked about this last year with regard to the hatchery return year group issue we had last year. Would any size limit changes in Area 7 for winter or summer help keep blackmouth open or reestablish it, or however you want to put it?
I haven't looked at size limit changes as a potential option yet, but it's good feedback to hear, and it's something that I can incorporate into kind of future looks with this to see what type of potential benefit or not there might be for size limit changes.
Okay, lastly, and this is more on the larger picture policy side, kind of outside your wheelhouse there, Derek, but I'm going to say it anyways. Right now, we've got a lot of feedback from a lot of fishermen watching Canada, rightfully within their season, catch a lot of fish. And a lot of the fish they're holding up for the camera are clipped and unclipped. And in the current trend we are heading for right now, it appears that Puget Sound, for the most part, will not be fishing on blackmouth all but a couple of weeks every year. And the Canadian fisheries are having a large impact on the very fish that we're being closed in order to protect. This is a issue that is obviously at the level of at the nation to nation level, but a lot of the frustration that we're hearing as advisors, especially up in the north area, has to do with this very issue. So I'm wondering if, I know perhaps Kelly's on the line, and I know Mark is, if this is something that's being addressed or planned on talking about, even though that the Pacific Salmon Management or Pacific Salmon Treaty is got probably 5 years to go, can this be opened up and addressed?
I know that you had addressed Mark, and so I'd very much look for his feedback in a moment. But I just wanted to kind of provide some information on how the Canadian fisheries have occurred in the past few years. Last year we saw some really major reductions to Canadian fisheries, and I spoke to DFO, our counterparts up north, as to what could have been driving some of those decreases. Really, in many of our ISBM fisheries, we saw anywhere from about 20% to 60% less catch than we would in kind of a recent year average. And they attributed kind of a lot of that change to COVID. And they had mentioned that they're getting less people coming up there to fish. Speaking to DFO, it sounds like we might be in a similar situation this year coming up to what was last year. They're anticipating similar COVID effects. I know that also another thing that's happened in the last recent 2 years, I believe, was that they had made some changes to when their seasons had started, particularly off the west coast of Vancouver Island and some of the other fisheries to protect southern resident killer whales. So we are seeing, I'm not saying that Canada isn't a big impactor on our stocks. They're certainly one of the biggest for many of our stocks. But I guess what I'm saying is I have seen kind of in recent years a little bit of a declining trend there. As far as the policy stuff goes, I think that you're right, Brett. That one's a little bit above my pay grade, so I'd look to Mark for some help with that one.
Well, I would say it's even above my pay grade a little bit too, Derek, but maybe just to add on to what you said a little bit, I think the other thing that Canada is dealing with is, some more depressed runs to the Fraser. I know they've had some big concerns with what happened with the Big Bar rock slide and continuing the both spring and fall Chinook populations that they had big concerns with Big Bar. I also, I think there was some money built into this most recent renegotiation under the treaty to kind of push Canada in a direction of some improving on their marking and tagging programs for hatchery fish. I've given a number of presentations to both staff and policymakers in Canada in the recent past about mark selective fisheries and how they've been implemented in Washington. So I think there's maybe some growing interest in moving in that direction in Canada as well. We've heard your feedback, Brett. There's other policymakers on this that are listening to your comments. So thank you for that, and we'll take that forward in the future. I see Spencer has a hand up. Go ahead, Spencer.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on what Brett just said about the Canada talk was the size limit restrictions. That said, that was a huge discussion about what would happen if you change the slot limit to 26 instead of 22. And you had some sizable improvements when that happened. So I'd love to see an updated version of that.
Thanks, Spencer. We'd be happy to. I know Derek said that he would be looking into that following this. So thank you for that.
If there aren't any more questions for the moment, maybe I can start to dive in and talk about some of these actions that we have in front of us.
Go ahead, Derek.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so talking about some of these actions, I think that we have kind of a few pieces of actions that are imminent, things that are going to that are likely to happen. So I might start by putting some X's in those boxes and explaining what those are. The first one is updating all of our Puget Sound fisheries to 2021. What I would say with this is just to be cautious that I don't have 100% of the inputs in the model available yet for the 2021 fisheries. There are still some kind of regional inputs that are being finalized and being worked up. In addition, I would say that right now I've left sport out of this option, the marine sport, because that's something that we're discussing today, and also because we can look at its effects separately in the next action. Which would be updating all of our sport fisheries to incorporate new effort information. And what I mean by new effort information, this gets back to Norm's question from earlier. The way that we model our sport fisheries is that we model everything as what's called a scalar. And a scalar represents the effort that we're seeing in the fishery based off recent years. That effort scalar then applies to the abundances that we have in the model. And then it comes out with and produces a fishery catch. And so we can change that scalar up or down depending on the season length, and then therefore it'll produce a different catch. What we've seen kind of in recent years is we've seen some of our areas have a little bit of an effort increase. And so now when we update that average, things go up a little bit over here. You can see just by updating those scalars, we increase the total Puget Sound catch by 2,300 fish approximately. And you can see what that does to the total stilly impacts. However, that's considering modeling Area 7 and Area 9 in the summer. As a full length season. I'm sorry, was there a comment real fast?
Go ahead, Derek.
That's considering modeling Area 7 and Area 9 as a full length season. And I just wanted to point out that that's kind of what we did initially last year in the modeling. But if folks remember, we made some updates during the preseason where we actually reduced the Area 7 and Area 9 quotas to meet our management objectives for Stillaguamish. And so what you see in rows 13 and 14 here for Area 7, 2,764 fish is what our scalars are predicting would be the amount of catch that's needed as a quota in that area to have a full 1.5 month season. But last year, at the end of the preseason, we reduced from that quota that the scalars were recommending to something lower. Once again, to save on those Stillaguamish impacts. And I think what we saw last year is I think we saw an early closure of the Area 7 summer sport fishery. That was something that was that we had acknowledged could be happening with our preliminary modeling in the preseason. And then similarly with Area 9, we took a similar action where we had a certain a certain quota that was coming out of our first run, and we reduced that slightly once again to save on Stillaguamish impacts and get to where we needed to be on the management objectives. So if we were modeling last year's fisheries fully as we did, then we would take these actions as well. And so you can see where that puts us. If we look over here at the blue boxes, this is where we are if we were to update the Puget Sound fisheries to be 2021, but really looking at those sport fisheries as they were executed exactly in the last season. So what you might initially note is that with 59.3 fish in the total stilly, that there's a little bit of wiggle room to get to that 62. There's there's kind of a few impacts that could get added in, but it's pretty close to that 62 to begin with. So I guess maybe what I'll do is I'll start looking at some of the actions that we were thinking about and that we put in this modeling tool. And then maybe I'll pause after I'm done going through the actions and kind of look for people's feedback. So starting with Area 11 in the winter. Area 11 in the winter was one that we had identified as relatively low cost. You can see kind of the different suite of options. You can see their impacts on the stillyfish over here. One thing I would say is, as we're going through these options, please note that that many of them are mutually exclusive. And what I mean by that is you can't put an X for opening up Area 11 in October, and then also put an X in opening Area 11 in October and November, because doing so would kind of double count those October impacts. So maybe if you're thinking about maybe as you're thinking about these options, think about selecting one that's under each of the bolded areas. Anyway, area 11 summer was one that we noted as likely kind of our best bang for the buck fishery that we've modeled. And you can see that over here. We get kind of a high amount of catch per stilly impact, as well as a decent season per stilly impact. And if folks remember last year, kind of the change to Area 11 summer, where we weren't open in June, was actually more due to Midhood Canal than Stillaguamish. Area 8. So Area 8 in the winter, this is one that we've modeled, and we know that this is an important fishery to a lot of folks. Area 8 is otherwise closed to Chinook fishing. However, one thing that I would note is that this year, Area 8 might be a little bit of a difficult sell, and that's just because of the status of where we are on both Stilly and Skagit. It is that marine area that's right out front of those stocks, and Skagit being below the low abundance threshold. I would also note that in many of these options, what we've done is we've modeled it either as January through March or February through March when we're looking at winter openings. The idea there is that we were looking at potentially aligning things with aligning up seasons with an Area 10 opening, and also kind of some of the feedback that we've heard from some of our sport advisors that February to March period might help to reduce our sublegal encounters. So that's kind of one thing that we've been thinking about there. I do want to get to the other areas, but for a moment, I guess I will just pause because I noticed that there was a hand raised by Jennifer.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
We hear you just fine. Go ahead.
Okay. So the question, or I guess it's a comment with respect to Area 7 last summer, is it was supposed to be, I believe, a 6-week season, and there was a pause in the beginning of August, right, for 2 weeks, and was supposed to reopen mid-August. And then a few days before the reopening, it was delayed another week. And I know I think everyone expects or anticipates the season will close early due to catch limits, but I think it is unreasonable to delay it a few days in advance of reopening it versus the opposite. So it was really disappointing to have planned an entire trip around being in the San Juans for the reopening, then just a few days right before the reopening decided to delay it. So I'd request in the future that you stick with firm opening dates and keep with the normal of closing it early if catch limits are attained.
Thanks for your feedback, Jennifer. Derek, I see Tony has his hand raised. Let's recognize Tony.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Tony.
On the spring Chinook on the Nooksack 2021, how many spring Chinook are the Lummi tribe and the Nooksack tribe allowed to take in their CNS fishery that goes on at the mouth of the Nooksack and up at Nugent Corner?
Hey, Tony, I think I'll take this one if that's all right, Mark. As I'd mentioned, there's still kind of some inputs that are outstanding as far as those 2021 initial inputs. And it just so happens that one of the regions that is outstanding is the Nooksack. So we don't have any preliminary inputs for that from the Nooksack tribe or the Lummi tribe just yet on what their fisheries are going to look like. Obviously for Nooksack Springs, we have a 10.5% SUS management objective. So we'll be monitoring that closely as we get those first runs in with 2021 fisheries. I guess I would just kind of highlight that this year Nooksack Springs are definitely a bright spot in what we're seeing in Puget Sound. We're seeing a return of forecast return of approximately 14,000 of those Nooksack Springs, which is kind of a bigger number than we'd seen in the past. So I don't have a very clear answer for you yet, and we're still pretty early in the modeling process. But I would recommend that you kind of look out for future model runs and what we're doing there.
I got another question for you too. Do you know how many spring Chinook are required at the South Fork hatchery, the Lummi tribe South Fork hatchery? How many of those spring Chinooks need to come back, and also how many Cohe need to come back?
Not to put him on the spot, but I know that we have Edward Alazer on the line, and he might have a better answer for what's going on in the South Fork hatchery goals than I do.
All right.
So I might just pause for a second. Ed, if you've got that at the tips of your fingers, go ahead. But I know Derek was kind of doing a deep dive here in some of these modeling options for Puget Sound, and I'd like to keep us on track with that discussion, Tony. So maybe what we can do is take those questions and follow up with you either later in the meeting or after the meeting and make sure we get you that information. So Derek, why don't you go ahead and dive back into what we were talking about with modeling?
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, everybody. So if I remember right, I think that we were on Area 9 winter. We had just gone through Area 8. And what I would say about Area 9 winter is that it's one of our higher catch winter fisheries. It's not particularly costly per stilly impact, but it can be costly for time on the water. And that's really signified by these columns N and O. You can see that 275 fish per catch, or 275 fish in a very similar place and structure to Area 9, where it's not particularly costly per stilly impact on the fish caught, but it is for the season. And then area 7 in the winter, we've heard some comments about that. There's been some pretty large reductions in time on the water in recent years. The fishery is a really high catch fishery, and it's also extremely costly on stilly impacts for the time on the water, as exemplified over here. So most of the actions that we've been talking about and examining so far are opportunity enhancements. While there's a small amount of wiggle room in column J in this blue box that you see up here at the top, we'll have to look for modifications to existing fisheries to create room if we want to add kind of a suite of additional season modifications. Remember, our goal is to produce a package with around 62 Stiligwamish mortalities maximum. To free up impacts, I thought that there was really 3 primary places to look. So Area 7 summer is the most costly area that was open last year to Stiligwamish impacts. The quota modeled here is already quite low, and it's unlikely that that what it's being modeled at, it's very likely that it can be closed early and that it won't make the full 1.5 month season. Therefore, if we kind of further downward modify it, it would be likely to continue shortening that season from what we actually see in actuality. Regardless, I would say that there's options available there. Once again, it is one of the higher impact places. Perhaps a different area where we could look is Area 9 in the summer. The area has a pretty healthy modeled quota of about 6,500 fish. Last year, the fishery ran a full season and caught about 3,800 fish. What I would say is I would just note and caution people that we did see a lower effort last year relative to what we had seen in recent years. If we were to model Area 9 Summer's total catch at around 3,800, the season would be kind of likely to close early. However, what you might notice is if we were to take this action right here, the reducing the quota to about 3,800, you could see that that would free up 4 stilly impacts. And so one option is we could model this basically at the catch that we had last year. And in doing so, it might just about free up enough space for maybe 2 months of fishing in the winter for Area 9. So that's kind of one example of an option that we could take and we could be looking at in this tool. Moving down the list, another area that we could look at is Area 5. In Area 5, we have to give up a whole lot of catch per stilly impact to make more space. And what you can see right here is I looked at what 16 days of fishing in Area 5 buys us in other areas. You can see it's 2 fish. I guess I would look and see if folks think it's an equitable trade to give up those 16 days to get 2 fish to be used in other areas. You might notice that Area 10 winter is here as well. And you might say, hey, that doesn't have a whole lot of stilly impacts. Why are we looking at that? And the reason I put that down there is just because if we want to align seasons better, if we start taking some of those options above where we're looking at February to March only, maybe it makes sense to change Area 10 winter to February to March only as well, to kind of align those seasons, to spread out the effort and hope that those seasons can stay open a little bit longer. The one last thing I would mention is that there are some stilly impacts in Area 10, 11, and 6 in the summer. However, I didn't really look at those areas here. Those impacts are pretty minuscule compared to these other summer fisheries. For example, the biggest impactor is Area 10 in the summer of those 3 remaining fisheries, and it's less than half of the impact of Area 5 summer, which already has a pretty low impact itself. So, and then once again, I heard comments from people. One option I can explore in the future is looking at those size limit changes. But I guess I first of all just wanted to see if this tool is helpful to people, see if there are any questions, and see if folks want to start putting some X's in boxes and see what that does. Brett, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, Derek, obviously, before we start reducing quotas and reducing season lengths, we want to look at other options. So yeah, it'd be really helpful if you can get that size limit changed to us as soon as possible. Echoing a lot of the concerns on Area 7, blackmouth was a huge upset. Losing blackmouth was a huge upset to most local fishermen. I don't know if this is an option available in your spreadsheet here. Could you model 1 month, the month of July for Chinook, and instead of the full 6 weeks, with the addition of the 2 weeks in August, could you just model 1 month in July and see if that opens up any impacts for that we could use during winter, or would that only simply help us meet the management objectives that we currently have to meet?
Thanks, Brett. If I could try to take a little bit of a stab at that question there. So we could model only July open in Area 7, and I would be interested to see how that quota came out based off of our current scalars, because we're looking at kind of the fishery reduction that we did last year was less than we needed for a full scalar. I'm not sure exactly how the catch would play out coming out from just modeling an Area 7 fishery versus what we put into the model. You can see as kind of a rough look, you can see right here, there's an option in line 45, and this is of course not what you asked here, but flipping to non-retention in July and August to Chinook fishing affords us about 9 stilly fish. And that's pretty close to the impact that would be for reopening February and March. in Area 7 in the winter. So that's an example of one trade we could look at there that that's almost impact neutral, that we might have to make some other slight reductions in other places to get to that.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, non-retention in the summer, it would be quite a blow to thousands of people. It wouldn't it wouldn't float very well. So what I'm proposing is that we look, if you could model in the next coming days or weeks, July retention of one Chinook in Area 7, so one hatchery just for July, and then see if that opens up impacts so we can get some time in the winter. This year is a pink year, so it'll help us with regard to non-retention of Chinook in August and September, because we have the pinks and the Cohe to help us keep us on the water and give some hope of opportunity. Next year would be a different story, but if you could do that for us, that'd be great. Just the month of July, one fish, and see if that gives us some winter blackmail. Thanks.
Thanks, Bert. I'll have a look at that. I see Carl's hand raised.
Yeah, there you go. Let me know if you can't hear me, but yeah, I mean, the first thing when looking at this tool, the first thing I wanted to say is I really appreciate the work. This is a really great example of the department listening to the stakeholders and what they were asking for with regards to at least the South Sound and the discussions that we had. And without having the tool in hand and being able to see all the rows at once, I can't make a complete evaluation here, but it looks to me like technically on the stilly stock that we could have an opportunity to restore some winter fisheries for a couple months, possibly in 9, 10, 11, and hopefully find a way to do it in 7. I know it's more complicated today, but
Apologies, Carl.
Background noise.
Just 1 second. Jeremy, I believe that you're unmuted.
Yeah. So anyways, my 2 cents, I guess, would definitely be to align 9 and 10, and see if the numbers would work to get 9 and 10 in February and March for a couple months, if it indeed required reducing that summer quota in 9 and or 10. I don't know. If there was a way to open 11 in the earlier time frame, that would give some guys a place to fish. I don't think you're going to get the kind of massive effort down in 11 like you saw in 10, but I know some guys would appreciate having that area 11 open there. Maybe November and December would be ideal, but I don't see that option on there. But October, I mean, you still get a few silvers maybe, and I don't know if there's a lot of shakers at that time, but that's for you guys to figure out. I don't actually personally fish 11. I have some constituents in our association that do fish 11 a bit, so I don't really want to push too much discussion on that area. But that's about all my comments. Mostly, I just wanted to, we'll take a further look at this tool and see. I can see that 62.2 up there with all the moves you just made, and so if that's really the parameter. And then of course the last comment is I understand the challenges of selling this, policy wise, politically wise, and that's where the frustration comes in, is if we can meet it with the conservation objective, we can hope we can stand on that to sell it, to work with the co-managers to get this done. But again, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate you putting this tool together and making the to see if we can get this done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Carl. And I think that was really helpful. I just want to make sure, and recognizing that we could do November and December in Area 11, I've preliminarily put October and November. So I just want to make sure that I've correctly captured the Carl Nyman fishing package here on the screen. which is opening Area 11 in October and November, opening Area 9 in February to March, reducing the Area 9 summer quota to what was caught last year, and changing the Area 10 season to be February and March, aligning with Area 9. And then I guess then the one other thing that I preliminarily put in here, just wanted to see if you thought that this would be a good idea if there was a little tiny bit of impact available, is Area 11 in June. As I'd mentioned, that's one that's pretty cheap for time on the water and for catch for stilly impacts. And and what that produces is about 62.2, which is right around the goal where we're looking at.
I absolutely know guys that would really appreciate that fishery if it were able to be put in the package.
Thanks, Carl. I'm just going to make some notes real fast while I give the floor to Spencer.
Go ahead and unmute yourself, Spencer.
Yeah, okay. I would just like to say that the folks, I mean, I live up here in Area 7, and we've been kind of taking it in the shorts here, and I was hoping we could look at an option that would give Area 7 some time. And kind of some things maybe I wrote down was a slight reduction in Area 5, modeling Area 9 summer at the 3,800, and Area 7 summer just July only retention of Chinook, and maybe, you know, squeezing a month in the winter, February or March in Area 7. You know, obviously there's some different things that could go if we kind of look across the board, but I think Area 7 is the easiest one because it has the most impact to pick on and kind of just kick it to the side. But there are, you know, a ton of people that live up here that really enjoy that time on the water. So I just hope that just because it's the easiest one doesn't mean maybe it's the one that we choose.
Hey, Spencer. I really appreciate that feedback. I have to apologize because I was still kind of finishing up my notes from what Carl had mentioned, and I know that you'd kind of went through kind of looking at some options here. If you could maybe repeat those, and I'll just put those up on the screen so you can have a look at it.
I just based on what you said, I'm figuring in a slight reduction of Area 5. It seemed like it would be too much of a hit for Area 9 summer. And then obviously a reduction in Area 7 summer to just July, no 2 weeks in August. And again, based, you know, like what Brett said, if we're gonna have a pink season, it'll soften the blow this summer by not having retention in August for Chinook. So again, just to kind of go over it, a reduction Area 5, modeling Area 9 after what they did last summer, and then a July only for Area 7. Just trying to get a you know, potentially a month, a February or March month on the, yeah, we're close. I mean, I feel like there's something that we can work with here to try to get us folks up here in Area 7 who are taking the most of it on the chin, some time on the water.
Thank you, Spencer. And I would agree that we're close. The one thing that I haven't modeled in what you had suggested there was the lowering of so kind of the change in Area 7 summer to being July only. Since I don't have that as an option right now, depending on how that shook out, it is possible that it could get us near that 62. So I'm just going to take a few notes on what you'd proposed here as something for the department to continue looking at as we're crafting those packages. Let me just kind of write it down, and then I'll get to Pat. If you give me just 1 second, Pat.
Looks like that would get us pretty close. Thanks.
Apologies, and thank you for your patience there, Pat. I'm ready for you now.
Okay, Derek, hear me?
Go ahead, Pat.
We hear you.
Okay. 2 points. One, just to go back to what Brett had brought up about the size limit for I think this is a very meaningful alternative, and of course it was modeled last year, and I think it's approximately right, if I'm looking at it correctly, that it would save about 4 fish if it was applied to area 7 during the summer. That's the 26-inch size limit. It had a between 4/10 and 5/10 of an exploitation rate point reduction in last year's modeling, so it would translate to something like 4 or 5 fish this year, I think. Then so I think that's really important to have that as part of our options going into building a package. We don't need to get into the reasons why it didn't go forward last year, but it does make sense. And I think it makes sense to consider it for other areas in the summer. We might consider it as when you make a size limit, that it's done more broadly, so that you're addressing issues such as enforcement. Consistency is really important, and it might make sense to people, and so that we might achieve a savings that's even more than that 4 fish, which could benefit in terms of alleviating either summer fishery pressure or the possibility of building a winter fishery proposal. The other issue is I do think that it was important, an important point that we brought up as the Puget Sound Sport Advisors to the department earlier in recommending a consistent winter fishery for the areas 6 through E11, I believe it was. And the argument there was that we were proposing 2 months, and the reason for that was that we thought there might be an in-between viability for an in-between option between last year's closure in those areas other than 10 and the 2019 fisheries that were open between 3 and 6 months for those, or excuse me, 3 and 6 weeks for those fisheries. And so I think that the important issue is that consistent seasons between many of those areas, like especially 6 through 9, there's probably quite a bit of movement, effort, transfers, or potential. And if you have only one opening, one area open, you're going to have more people fishing there. It's going to be difficult for your predictions to play out as predicted, using history as your basis for predicting, and that just gets out of problematic. And you can have, with the uncertainties, but likely higher effort in the COVID era that we saw last year in a number of our fisheries, I think it's pretty important to try to find solutions that minimize that potential. So consistent season might be important. Of course, we know that some of the areas, such as were discussed in 7 cut of August as a soft proposal, that people are wanting to look at direct trades in those areas, and I think that's fair. So maybe you might start in general at trying to have a consistent winter fishery. Maybe it's 1 month, but then you add on based on things that are done in those particular areas, benefiting a particular area during the summer, or that's a cost to that area is paid for, and so should the increase ought to be in a particular area for the winter. So anyway, those are some thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. I'll just once again mention that the size limit is something that I can look at, and I think I heard in addition maybe looking at some other areas as well, and not just 7. So that's something that I can look at in the future modeling. I think as far as the idea of opening areas 6 through 9 winter, I have that on screen here for 2 months. You had mentioned maybe looking at things in terms of only 1 month. So that's something that I can look at as well in the future. Randy has a hand raised.
Yeah. Yeah, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Hello?
Randy. We can hear you.
So I just want to come out on the side that I don't think going into the negotiations, we sit down with the co-managers, offering cuts before we even see where we're at is a very good idea. I for one think that the cuts last summer, that one lady that caught it on the line when it was changed at the last minute, I thought that was a bad idea. But I don't think we should go in and offer cuts in hopes of getting something that we have no assurance that we'd even get. I mean, I think we should go in with the status quo and maybe negotiate something down. We can't go in offering cuts in the hopes of maybe getting other opportunities. I believe that the sports community has lost over 90% of their fishing in the last 6 years. And I think that we've taken enough of the cuts, and I don't think that offering cuts before we even start to negotiate is a very good idea. That's just an opinion. It's not really a question. Yeah. That's pretty much it.
Well, we'll take opinions too, Randy. Thank you. Dan Stauffer, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about the delay there. I had to grab my tablet. I may have missed this. I had some work considerations I had to pay attention to, but the talk of reducing the summer quota in Area 9 caught my ears. And if I recall correctly, we opened Area 9 on July 24th last year rather than the 16th. If that's something we're still considering, we're probably okay at 3,800 fish. But if we open Area 9 on July 16th at 3,800 fish, the Port Townsend fishery is going to eat up a large chunk of that. The delay in the season last year, I believe, allowed a lot of those fish to move through, and they weren't intercepted, is one of the reasons why the season ran the length it did last year. So are we looking at the 16th or the 24th to open Area 9 in the summer?
So thanks, Dan. I was just trying to pull it up on my computer here. My recollection was that last year we did open on the 16th, and it was 2019 where we opened later. My recollection from last summer was we essentially got full fishery seasons in 9, 10, and 11, having never achieved those quota levels last year for the first time in a number of years. Again, I'll try to pull up that the regulation from this year from last summer to be sure, but that's my recollection. But I do understand what you're saying. I do recall that the year when we opened later, a week later, to try to reduce some impacts, and it wasn't a very satisfying fishery for those guys up north in the Port Townsend area. They missed out on a lot of opportunity after those fish had already moved through. So thanks, Dan. I appreciate that comment.
Well, thank you, Mark. About the only thing I really remember from last summer is the smoke as thick as fog choking us out while we were trying to fish.
Yep, I remember that too.
It was gross.
Art, go ahead. Do you want to unmute yourself, Art?
Can you hear me now?
Gotcha. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm just kind of reflecting on Carl's comments earlier about Marine Area 11. I think either October, November, or Derek alluded to maybe you could do a November, December even, something along those lines. And then the June fishery as well. Not a huge amount of impacts there, but boy, you get a lot of people on the water for sure. So there's good opportunities.
So Art, I may put you on the spot here.
Thank you.
You've been an Area 11 constituent for a long time. In your opinion, is a fall fishery more meaningful or a spring fishery? So if you could have your choice of fishing in like November, December, or fishing in maybe like February or March, what do you think the guys in Area 11 would like?
October, November, December, something like that. For sure. I mean, if we can do it.
Appreciate that, Art.
You bet. And thank you.
Norm
This is
Reinhardt.
an awesome tool, by the way.
Thank you, Art. Appreciate that.
Thanks. And Norm, I'm sorry, just 1 second, Norm. I just wanted to make an acknowledgement that I put your season up there on the screen, Art, and it gets us at 62.1. So it'd be pretty close to that 62 objective. Go ahead, Norm.
Okay. Yesterday and today, the little Pogie club I'm associated with, we were helping move some silvers to the net pens with the Suquamish. So I had about 10 guys there at a work party, and I floated the idea of trading some summer quota for winter opportunity. And there wasn't one of them there that was willing to do that. Half of them were older than I am, and I'm 70. They were all died in the wool, old blackmouth fishermen. But I wanted to also point out that this summer, I really believe we're going to have an explosion of fishermen on the water. We're coming out of this COVID crisis. It looks like we're going to have vaccinations for anyone that wants them prior to the opening of summer Chinook season. And I know from the people I've talked with, people are biting at the bit to get out from under this COVID thing and get out and play. And that was, someone made that point to me yesterday also, that any reduction in days on the water, in trading days in the summer versus trading them for the winter, they wouldn't like. I'm just passing that message on from the few folks that I've been able to talk to because of all of this quarantine stuff. And I wanted to make a comment about size limits. We at one time were looking at reducing the size limit to 20 inches, especially in the winter. Have we modeled that to see if that would help us? Instead of blowing out our sublegals, maybe helping us on that side of it. Moving the blackmouth season into February and March for area 9 and 10, I think, and I've always thought it's been a good idea. So we might want to look at that. But mostly I just wanted to pass on the message that for the common everyday fisherman, I didn't hear much support for reduction of quotas in the summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. I just have one quick comment there, or maybe a quick question. We have a lot of folks on the line. Just to be aware of where the Pogie Club is based out of, so that folks know what marine area you're talking about that wouldn't want to trade its quota.
Sure. There's about 200 member families, about 500 people in the club. We're located in Kitsap County, which means that we fish areas 9, 10, 11, and 12 primarily. So we cover a lot of different areas in Central Sound. At least the membership in this club does. Does that help you, Derek?
It does. Thank you so much, Norm.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Norm. Again, I really appreciate everybody's thoughts and comments today. This is really why we're here. The department hasn't decided on any particular fishing package to take forward as an initial proposal, and that's why we're here today, is to kind of is to gain your feedback and as we go forward through this process. So I see Brett has his hand up again. Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, I just, to piggyback on what Norm just said, no one up here is in favor of reducing quotas either, nor reducing seasons. There's no support for that. Many of us feel that blackmouth shouldn't have been relinquished last year, and it should not be viewed as adding a season this year. It should just be something we shouldn't have lost, and it should be put back in. But the reality is that we have to work within the management constraints we have this year. So what I'm offering is that we hope that changing size limit could help avoid any change in what we had last year, and help reestablish blackmouth. But if it comes to it, reducing not the quota, but the season to July only, as opposed to July and 2 weeks of August, would help. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. And I might just make a quick comment. Norm had talked about a potential explosion of fishermen. I mean, I just want to kind of pump up our sampling and monitoring programs throughout Puget Sound. The department, the state and the federal government has poured a lot of money into our sampling and monitoring. We have some really robust programs in place that allow us to collect some really good data and have helped us over a long period of time. So I'm not so worried about an explosion of fishermen. I think we're going to set seasons with significant levels that allow plenty of time for people to go fishing in as many marine areas for as long a period of time as we can get open. One of the things that the department is committed to do is expand those programs this year through Cohe management, specifically through the month of September. In recent years, for several different areas, we've been kind of over what we expected in the preseason. Not that that's not an unusual event, but it's just as these constraints get a little tighter, we want to make sure that we're staying kind of within what we think we're doing on a preseason basis, and make sure that those fisheries don't get too far out from what we expect. So I talked long enough. Tom Drews raised his hand. Hi, Tom.
Thanks, you guys. There was one line on my spreadsheet that I don't know.
Tom, your audio is really bad, buddy.
Okay. All right. Let me go and mute me. Try phone.
While Tom's trying to reconnect via different audio, any other questions? Comments? Go ahead, Art.
Hello.
Gotcha.
Okay. So I've been I'm at work today, so I've been kind of in and out. So if I'm correct, these are kind of preliminary ideas, knowing similar situations arose the last couple of years, and more information is coming from the tribes, from Canada, et cetera, et cetera. So there will be a little bit of movement no matter what, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that, it's good to have some ideas going up front, but when do you think there'll be more clarity in what's going on? Will that be 2-3 weeks out?
Great question, Art. So let me maybe get into that a little bit. So if we're thinking about how the process works, so what we're doing together this week as co-managers is everybody's laying their initial fishing proposals on the table into kind of what we call our initial co-manager model run. So we'll do that later this week, and then we'll come together as co-managers and talk about what those results are, where we're not meeting those exploitation rate objectives, where we may need to consider other shaping that needs to happen. We'll also continue on our kind of regional fishery meetings. I know we have several meetings planned with co-managers on Friday. in the Snohomish Basin and the Nooksack Basin. And I think one other one, all the meetings get away from me to try to remember, but so then next week, we'll probably have some preliminary results in either of those Puget Sound Rec breakout meetings. We'll probably have some preliminary results from that co-manager modeling. We'll make sure you check the website. We'll try to have that information up on the website as well. So from there, we'll take additional feedback based on some of that modeling. Then the following week after next week is when we have our North of Falcon 2 meeting. I don't know if there'll be more than one co-manager model run before then, but we'll come to the North of Falcon 2 meeting. It'll be very similar to this. We'll go over kind of most recent modeling, what it looks like, where we may need to make additional considerations for fishery shaping. And then that will lead into the final PFMC week as we're considering kind of a final fishing package. So this really is just to share with you some of the things that we've been seeing as far as where the sticking points are as far as management objectives this year, where we think we're going to be able to do things differently this year, and then, yeah, take that forward through the rest of the process. So hopefully that answered your question, Art.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I'll just maybe do a quick check. If Tom has different audio capabilities, I'd recognize him again.
Yeah, I do. Sorry, you guys. Sometimes when I go through my work computer, I sound like Alvin the Chipmunk.
That was it.
So I switched to phone. Wanted to kind of make a comment on the Area 7 situation that we're in. You know, I remember back, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, we really had trouble getting fisheries out in Area 5 and Area 6 because of Mid-Hood Canal and those fisheries just being right in front of a really limiting stock. And I think that's the situation we're in with the Stilly, which is really unfortunate. There's one line on the spreadsheet I don't understand if I understood it right. So Derek, could you go down to, I think it was like line 46? What, can somebody explain that one to me? Because to me, I think that means we can fish for Chinook in July, and then it would be non-retention for Chinook or non-retention for all fish in August.
Hey, Tom. So just to elaborate on that one, and perhaps I should have elaborated on this option better as I was going through the modeling exercise. So this would be lowering the quota to 1,000, and that isn't necessarily what the scalers are saying we would need as modeled in July. I was just looking at kind of a little bit of a reduction from what the quota is there currently. And then it would be building in non-retention for the whole August period. And so what that means is it would be non-retention to Chinook, but that you would be allowed to keep Coho and Pinks if there is impacts for those two to those two stocks or species rather.
Okay, thanks. So as a frequent traveler to Area 7, I think I am then in favor of, or I would add my vote, if you will, to, you know, being able to fish for Chinook in August, and then not fish for Chinook fish for Chinook in July and not in August, for the opportunity to get back some winter fishery, you know, February or March or whatever. And Brett, I don't know if you've got if it was only 1 month, if you have a particular month, but I think in my view, you know, later in the spring is better because you're going to get bigger fish and a chance at a springer, but that'd be what I would support. And I know it's a little over, I get it.
Thanks, Tom. Jennifer has her hand up. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Thank you. I know there's been discussion around trading a 1-for-1 between summer fishing and winter fishing opportunities, but I don't think it's really a 1-for-1 trade, because winter fishing, in my opinion, is more of a privileged elite fishing club of people that have bigger boats and bigger, I guess, opportunities to go out and fish. And a summer fishery with usually easier weather, smaller seas, has a more equal opportunity access to more fishermen at that time. So I'm all for blackmouth. Don't get me wrong. I bought a fishing boat this summer because I've never been able to blackmouth fish ever. So I did catch my first blackmouth in January, but that's only because I have the means to go buy a bigger boat. Not everyone does. So I just want to consider that as we're going forward to keeping more of those summer opportunities to give a well-rounded chance for everyone to fish.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your comments. Brett has his hand up again. Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, Mark, just to address Tom's last comment and Jennifer's, were we to get a blackmouth fishery back of any sort, I would be totally open, and I think it'd be important to get a lot of fisherman input from Area 7 with regard to what month we applied that opportunity. But as Jennifer points out, it might be better to move it towards the latter part of the season, March, April timeframe. I think we usually normally get cut off April 15th. So maybe March 15th, April 15th, to provide perhaps more opportunity based on conditions. But that would have to kind of be balanced with what Pat brought up, which is the effort to try and align the seasons. So there'd be a lot of talk that would have to be had, but I don't think we're looking at any more than, if we do get anything in a month, and having it towards as spring approaches would help address Jennifer's concern. Thanks.
Thanks, Brett. Don has his hand up. Go ahead, Don.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to comment on one thing. I may be the only one here from the beleaguered community of Point Roberts who have been absolutely hammered by the pandemic, unfortunately. And the people up here, depend on Area 7, and we are going to need a lot of help when we start opening up. People fish right off the point here, as many of you are well aware, and just not to say anything against what the fairness thing. We got people out here in rowboats because it's right off the shore in the summer and winter. So just to compound on or to just kind of stick up for Area 7 a little bit more, please consider us. There's a lot of people here and in the island counties, the San Juans, that depend on the fishery a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Don, for your comments. Carl Nyman, go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. I just wanted to quickly comment. I appreciate Jennifer's comments and everyone's comments in the public forum here. Just quickly wanted to explain the thinking behind why we would consider those of us that support sacrificing some of the summer quota in order to try and get some winter opportunity back is twofold. One is that, the winter blackmouth fishery historically has been around forever. And this last winter was the first time that we saw it go away. And in this process, when we lose winter fisheries or any fishery, it tends to set a precedence for future years where it gets harder and harder to get any of these fisheries back. So that's the number one goal, is to restore some, even if it does cost something. The other thought for us is, historically, as stakeholders in the sport fishing, most of us want to get the maximum amount of time on the water. And the thought is, if we lose some of our summer king quota, you realize, we can still go out and fish for pinks and coho. And you could catch a king, you might have to release it. But, if you have to eat a pink or smoke your pink or eat a coho rather than have a king on the barbecue, it's, to me, it's a small price to pay in order to restore months of winter fishing in multiple areas. That being said, we have a lot of hurdles to actually get this through and see a winter fishery in our final package. But I just wanted to explain the thinking of those of us that do support those types of moves. Thanks.
Appreciate that, Carl. Well, I'm not afraid of a little silence. Just want to make sure that everybody has had a chance to speak who wishes to provide comments or ask questions. Again, just a reminder, we have our rec meetings next week, starting on Tuesday, the 23rd in the evening, starting at 6. We'll have a similar one on Thursday, the 25th in the evening. And then I'd have to check the date, but I think it's the following Wednesday or Thursday. We have our North of Falcon 2 meeting. I think it's Wednesday, the 31st. I see, again, I start talking and I get more hands raised. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to touch base on what Brett Rawson had brought up earlier in regards to the Canada fisheries. Where can we find out more information in regards to that and research that's been completed in regards to impacts to our fisheries? Because looking, just listening to like what Brett had mentioned, seeing these Canadian charter captains that are currently harvesting and retaining hatchery fish, and knowing full well that the Canadian hatcheries only clip less than 10% of their fish. I mean, where can we find that type of data and information that's been done, or really, I guess the question is, has that been done to determine what type of impacts they have on our fisheries? Now, I know that they have their DNA tests that a lot of the charters complete during their catch and release, their non-retention fishery that they have. And with that DNA tests, they have found that they have a large, very large amount. After talking to Jason Tonelli and some of the charter captains up in BC, they've confirmed that they have a very large number of the fish they are, that they're releasing are of Washington origin. So where can we, as the general public, find that information, and how soon, or really will we ever see that be an impact on the decisions that are being made for our fisheries?
Hey, Jeff, if I could maybe start by taking this one, and if Mark has anything to add. So you can find that information through the Chinook Technical Committee. There's reports that group publishes on the impacts of Canadian fisheries on our stocks. Additionally, they have reports going back a pretty long time series on escapements of stocks, as well as area-specific catches. So all that information is available publicly online. If you'd like, I can link you to the report section of the Chinook Technical Committee webpage.
Yeah, if you could throw that in the chat, if you could throw that link in the chat, I'd appreciate it.
It'll be up there in just a minute.
Okay. And then I guess just to follow up on that, do you have any examples, or have we seen any results of their impacts on our fishery, and what type of decisions WDFW has made in regards to that? Because I just find it really hard to believe, seeing the number of hatchery fish that you see these charters retaining, not having some inverse impact on our fisheries, and our ability to have a longer summer fishery, or even have a winter blackmouth fishery.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jeff. So as Derek said, the Chinook Technical Committee does the kind of the run reconstructions based on coded wire tags. I think it's 2 years behind, so I think we just are kind of looking at the 2019 returns right now. As he said, that information's available on the website. And as far as how it factors into decision making, well, we have the Pacific Salmon Treaty, and we have those management objectives levels that we're both managing to bilaterally. We review those reports and kind of fishery evaluations through the Pacific Salmon Commission. There's a number of different committees that report to the commission about fisheries performance, and they have those discussions at the commission level. Obviously, to make big changes in the treaty takes time, and I think the current one lasts, as Brett indicated earlier, for another 5 years. So I don't think there's an immediate changes that can happen, but that fishery evaluation does take place over time and can potentially lead to different things whenever that renegotiation happens in the future. So thanks, somebody on the text message reminded me that we've been pretty Chinook centric in this discussion so far today. And I did not want to forget my preferred species to catch in the summertime, which is coho. I think in general, we can think about pretty similar seasons or even expanded seasons from last year. It looks as though the Skagit coho run is better than last year. So I would anticipate that we're going to try to get into both marine areas 8.1 and 8.2. Obviously, we've talked about the Snohomish coho concerns. That's going to be problematic for having kind of robust coho directed fisheries in 8.2. I think what we were looking at from a department point of view for coho opportunity in that area was proposing a mark selective fishery in the area from essentially the Mukilteo Ferry Dock south, like we did in 2019. So I think how we're thinking about things is that would be a mark selective on coho and then a pink retention in that area for the summertime period. I don't think we've centered into how long that would be. Obviously, we're looking to try to maximize opportunity and minimize impact. So there's a balancing point there somewhere. I think in general, when we're looking around Puget Sound and the coho fisheries, we're really looking at all fisheries and how they affect the Snohomish stock and how we can maximize escapement there. So that may mean in certain areas and certain time periods, we may go to mark selective as an option to make sure that we're minimizing those Stillaguamish impacts. But again, I don't think we've centered on any particular fisheries package yet. Still have to do some modeling and try to assume or assess where our biggest hitters are on that Snohomish stock. So maybe I'll pause there and recognize Pat.
Thank you, Mark. And good that we're having that discussion on coho. I had one idea going back to the presentations on the management objectives for Snohomish coho being likely the most the biggest concern conservation wise, and so those wild coho are really important, and although they're quite a bit more abundant in a forecast this year than they were last year, they're still not they're not like some of the big years of recent past. So what the 55,000 escapement objective means is a very much reduced level of impact down to something around 8 or 9%, I think, an exploitation rate in our fisheries, and so that's quite constraining. But I wondered if you'd thought about approaching that stock and its management in a similar way as you have are proposing and are working with us on for Stillaguamish Chinook. I guess at least in the case of the wild fish, that we look at an objective, a 50% of the allowable impact. If the impact is around 8 or 9%, maybe we're working with around 4 to 5% for non-treaty fisheries and see what that could get us. And overlaying that objective onto concerns that I know a lot of sport fishers have for coho fisheries that are mark selective is that there are times in areas where that just doesn't work very well. And the classic examples in our area are late in the season in the Straits or San Juans, and also perhaps the mark rates in the area 8.2 and 8.1 are strong runs of wild fish, smaller runs in general, or lower mark rates for in those areas, even during the normal early fall time frames, can make those fisheries, selective fisheries, be less than appealing. There's a cost in terms of the I guess the acceptability of low mark rate fisheries. So anyway, Mark, with those thoughts, perhaps you have some thoughts to yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. And I think the reason we had thought about and maybe I didn't speak clearly enough, we wouldn't be considering mark selective opportunity in 8.1. I think that's pretty clear that the mark rates there don't necessarily support that. I think we'd be more apt in retrying what we did in 2019. What we've seen in that kind of lower portion of 8.2, and sorry, I'm having some network in and out there for a second, so hopefully I didn't lose anybody. But what we've seen in that lower part of 8.2 is that's actually a place where the fish mill about. There's quite a, you don't necessarily want to call them dip ins, but that's a place where kind of at the lower end of Whidbey Island there, where the fish tend to mill around before they shoot off into whatever direction towards their natal stream. So we've been able to look at some of that data, and that's why we chose to offer that opportunity in 2019. I guess the other consideration there might be if we were not to go mark selective, that it may be a shorter opportunity directed at coho, and that we could even go far as coho non-retention. But it just becomes problematic, Pat, as you know, when we're in these mixed stock areas. And we have a healthy run going to the Stillaguamish, but a not healthy run right next door in the Snohomish, and just trying to find that balancing act in what those fisheries opportunities are. So thanks for that feedback. Any other thoughts or questions about coho seasons? I would just expect some pretty similar seasons in an initial modeling package to what we've had in the recent past. I don't anticipate big changes there right out the gate. I don't know if Pat still has his hand up, but maybe I'll go to Norm first.
Yeah, Mark, you were talking about going to a mark selective coho fishery. I was following you until you expanded that conversation to, are you talking about going to a mark selective fishery for throughout lower Puget Sound, areas 9 through 13?
Well, remember, we're already mark selective in 9, and we're already mark selective in 13. It's 10 and 11 where we're not currently.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to take a look at what those fisheries are and their impacts on Snohomish. It seems to me like we have better mark rates earlier in the year, like maybe August, early September, than we do later in September into October for coho. So again, as Pat said, there's different time periods and different places where you have better mark rates than you do in other places. It's not going to be in our initial proposal, I don't believe, Norm, but it is something that we consider just depending on where we are with Stillaguamish.
So are you going to run a model on that to bring to Linwood for us?
Absolutely, Norm.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Carl.
I think when Norm said Linwood, he means north of Falcon too, right here on our desk. I think you mostly answered my question, was very similar to Norm's. It's just, my comment would be that, well, first of all, I appreciate you're not immediately going selective unless you feel like there's a lot of pressure to do so. And then that if you do need to go selective in, for instance, Marine Area 10 in June, that converts to a non-selective coho when the adults show up in the fall would be my hope. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Carl. Norm, did you have your hand up again?
Yeah, just, why, I understand why we might have to consider a mark selected fishery, opening it up and more broadly. So why is it that some of our coho are being marked and some aren't in mid-sound? Like, I know yesterday, everything we moved was all marked, 300,000 fish. But yet on the other side of the pond, what, there are 750,000 fish that aren't being marked or aren't being clipped. That kind of confuses me. Maybe this is the right place for this conversation.
So you kind of had me at a loss, Norm. Are you suggesting that there's net pens like on Elliott Bay that aren't being marked? The coho
Yeah.
aren't being marked?
Yeah.
I'd be happy to look into it.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we've been at this for a couple hours. As I kind of pause and start talking again, want to thank again everybody for being here. I want to give an extra big thanks and shout out to Derek, as others have, for the amount of work that he put into the Chinook modeling tool to help folks understand some of the information that we've been looking at. That's been helping to guide some of our discussions internally. Just a reminder to check the website for information, and also we do have a public commenting tool up there about seasons. So make sure that folks are providing feedback there too. We do read that stuff. We do consider it as we're crafting seasons. It's all part of kind of the record that we collect and develop as part of us developing a fisheries package every year. I don't think we can emphasize it enough that our interactions with you and your feedback are of utmost importance to us. The fisheries outcomes may not always turn out the way folks want them, and that's totally understood. But it really helps us to make sure that we are consistently and constantly hearing your feedback on what's important to you for fishery season. So thanks everybody again for being with us today. I might just give a quick pause there to see if anybody else in the department chain wants to give any few words here at the end of the meeting.
Hey, Mark, I just echo your thank you to everybody who provided their advice and feedback. I do want to let people know that I've written it all down as much as I could, and I have suggestions from Carl, Spencer, Art, Norm, Brett, Tom, Jennifer, and others. So really, really appreciate that. That's very helpful to us. Thank you, everybody.
I see Dan Stauffer has his hand up. Go ahead, Dan.
Thanks, Mark. I wanted to go back to the pinks just a little bit. Looking at the opportunities for the other Washington stakeholders in the commercial side, I don't see very many opportunities for them to earn their living this year. I was wondering if they've brought up any discussions about gear conflict during our pink seasons.
So at this point, I think staff at the department are looking at some very limited pink opportunity for our commercial fishers. We haven't had those discussions with co-managers yet, so we haven't really centered around any formal proposal. The two places we were looking at are places where we've had pink directed opportunities in the past. One of those is in area 10, and that's probably the one you're considering there with your comment. And the other was kind of in the Skagit Bay area. The Skagit Bay area is really tough because we know there's impacts on the spring stock, there's impacts on summer fall stock. there's also likely to be some Stillaguamish pink impacts in there too, with those being below escapement. Not sure we're going to be able to get that opportunity in there, but it's one we're considering. I'm assuming you're talking particularly about gear conflicts in Area 10.
Yes.
I know we've been really limited. I think that what we have right now would be 2 boats a couple days a week. And I don't think any of my commercial staff are on this call, but we are considering it, but it would be very limited, I guess is the best way to put it, Dan.
Yep. Like others, I'm worried about some of the new anglers I'm expecting to see this year, and they might not know how those guys operate, know what to avoid. So some outreach might be a good thing to have.
Appreciate that bit of feedback, Dan. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, again, want to thank everybody for being with us today. Make sure you're checking the website for additional information as we get it. We'll get it up on the website and get it out to folks. With that, I look forward to connecting with folks next week at our next opportunity to be together. And again, really thank the staff and everybody from the public who is with us today to provide feedback. We really appreciate your time and your input. So thanks, everybody. Take care, be safe, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.